newspaper has reportedly dropped page 3, which for the Sun is something of an institution. Basically, page 3, if you're not familiar, is famous in the UK for depicting topless young women. I mean literally topless. I'm not talking about in a bra or anything like that. I mean topless, full breasts, everything you can see. And this is something of an institution. It's famous for sort of lorry drivers and builders and so on ogling at page 3, as critics would have it. And this has become something of a central issue in the whole objectification debate. Now, I've made a few videos on the subject of objectification, but I guess it's my responsibility to clarify what I'm getting at as well. Just regarding this situation with page 3, it's unclear what the situation actually is, because apparently the Sun had quietly dropped it after a long-running campaign by feminist lobbies to have it banned. So maybe that was under pressure and they've dropped it. But I noticed that the Daily Star, which is a rival of the Sun, was gloating about the fact they would continue to run page 3. So maybe the Sun has come back with it, and apparently today they had a naked, topless young model, so they haven't dropped it at all. And it sounds like what's happened is the Sun contemplated it, then went back on their contemplation. My own stance on page 3 is that it's got no place in a newspaper. I hate the Sun anyway, so perhaps I'm biased against it, but I don't think that it's got any relevance whatsoever other than to titillate male readers. And this is coming from someone who is in no way a feminist, and but I honestly speaking, guys, let's be honest here, it doesn't have any place in a newspaper. It really doesn't. It's got nothing to do with news, and it's basically just to... And also, I think there's something very tasteless and crude about putting sexuality on the same page as, I don't know, floods in Malawi killed 200 people. There's something very tactless and inappropriate in that regard. So I think page 3 has no place in a newspaper. Even if the Sun is trash, it's still a newspaper and it's got no place in it. And then there's some newspapers that are so, well, you know, the likes of the Daily Sport don't even deserve the title newspaper. They're actually far more explicit than the Sun, but I guess the reason the Sun's been targeted is because it has the biggest readership among the tabloids. Even though it's declined since phone hacking, I'm pleased to say. So that's my position. I don't believe it has any place in a national newspaper. But, there's always a but to these things. Regarding the wider issue of objectification, I've tried to explain why I think that is something that is now being taken to extremes. Now, it's one thing pushing to have this banned in the newspaper, where I think most or many people would agree it has no place. But the problem is feminist lobby groups want to expand this to all sexuality whatsoever. So one day it's banned in a sleazy newspaper. The next day we're going to see sexuality possibly being banned in films. And I don't think this is an exaggeration. I honestly believe if feminist lobbies had their way, anything to do with female sexuality that has any connection to men whatsoever, they will push to be banned. And I can't help but wonder, why is it they have made such an issue of this under the editorship of David Dinsmore? He's the current editor of The Sun. And believe me, I'm no cheerleader for Dinsmore. I don't like any Sun editor. I instinctively take a disliking to them because of what they do. Simply being editor of The Sun gives me a reason to, I hate The Sun, put it that way. But anyway, I'm going off on a tangent. But the point is, why did they not make such a big issue over this when Rebecca Brooks was editor? Now, she was editor for years. She didn't get rid of page 3. No doubt that would have disappointed feminists, but why did they not make such an issue of it when she was editor? Why did they not pressure her to come to talks about getting rid of it. Maybe they did, but certainly not as vocally. And it certainly wasn't as big an issue when she was editor. So I can't help but think there is a gender issue here, from the point of view that the feminist lobbyists only care because the Sun happens to be run by a male editor, and because most of the people enjoying Page 3 are men. But let's not lose sight of the fact there may well be lesbian women who read the Sun who enjoy Page 3. I mean, it's not inconceivable. We're a diverse country. But I am convinced that if it was a case that lesbian women liked it, feminists wouldn't have a problem with it. Because feminists automatically object to anything that men enjoy involving women. That might sound like a dramatic statement, but I genuinely believe that is the case. I genuinely believe that if men are attracted to female sexuality, feminists will think there's something wrong with it. Because they're so obsessed by this notion of empowering women that only if it's entirely run by women are they happy. And I believe that's why they didn't make such an issue of it when Rebecca Brooks was editor. Rebecca Wade was her former name. I genuinely believe that. Because the fact it's a male editor, and I'm like I say, I'm no fan of David Dinsmore, but I can't help but to think that is the reason. But I want to go into wider issues here beyond Page 3, because the Sun is trash and Page 3 isn't needed, in my opinion. I don't think it's the worst thing about the Sun. Far from it. I think what's a lot more dangerous is the fact that the Sun constantly stirs up negativity and hostility to unemployed people, and stirs up divisions in society, and distorts the situation in immigration. I think those are all more important issues than Page 3. Regarding the whole issue of objectification, I'm not saying that there is no problems connected with it, and I'm not saying that the term is completely invalid. What I'm arguing is that it is being taken now to extremes to control everything. I do think there are legitimate concerns about the effect of body image on young women. Young men as well, but perhaps particularly young women, who do suffer quite proportionately from it. There is obviously double standards. I mean, the other day I was in the pawn shop and I saw two cheap calendars. One was entitled Babes, one was entitled Hunks. Now I see no difference whatsoever. Both were depicting human sexuality. Babes was showing breasts and women in bikinis, that sort of thing. Hunks was showing men in oil with six-packs, and I see no difference. No difference whatsoever. But you will never ever hear feminists have any problem with a Hunks calendar. Now they might argue that objectification of women is more widespread. There may be some truth in that, but if you're going to be against objectification, then be consistent and be against all objectification. Otherwise, it just shows that there is a gender bias agenda, and I believe there is, referred with feminism. But the problem I have is these lobbies, and I believe they're very powerful lobbies, are trying to basically control and dictate to everyone else how they think the world should be, and how they think that... What I really take issue with is when they start interfering in adult free will. So it's one thing trying to get it banned in the Sun, which is supposedly a family newspaper, and children have access to it, so I think I really have no problem with it being banned in the Sun. But what they're pushing for is for it to be banned in lads' magazines. The lads' magazines are designed for young men, not for children, for young men. And why do they not take the same issue with women's magazines, which are just as obsessive about looks? Perhaps in a different way, but I just think there's a lot of hypocrisy about these moral crusades. And it makes me wonder, are we becoming like the Victorians again? And that's not a good thing, because actually the Victorians were profound hypocrites. They were incredibly prudish with sexuality, but the Victorian underclass, it was in Victorian London there was something like 80,000 prostitutes. So much for Victorian etiquette, and the reason I'm mentioning that is because there is an element of moral outrage to this that is reminiscent of the Victorian period or the 1950s, and I think it's a little bit tiresome. And it's not that I have any desire to defend the Sun. It's not about the Sun, it's about wider issues. I don't think that they're happy just stopping with the Sun and saying, okay, we believe in adult free will. I don't believe they do respect adult free will. I also would make this point. I think that adult women who appear in adult films, or who play sexually explicit roles, or appear in a sexy pose for a men's magazine, then turn round and endorse some feminist crusade, I think that is profoundly hypocritical. I really do. If you're saying that, oh, but it's about the context, i.e. men like it, well then I would make the point, well, the roles that you've done, the acting roles that you've done, what was the purpose of that? If not to attract attention. You know, we're not talking here about young girls trafficked from Eastern Europe and exploited. I am talking about any depictions of sexuality, and frankly I do believe that the feminist lobby has a problem with any depiction of female sexuality. The only way they will be content is if it is entirely run by women and only women enjoy it, because if a man enjoys a female form, in the feminist mindset, that man is a pervert who wants to control her. And I just think this is so disingenuous and so dishonest as to basic human nature. The fact of the matter is this: heterosexual men will always be attracted to the female form. Now, different men might portray that in different ways, you know, and I'm not saying all guys like the same thing, of course not. But fundamentally, all heterosexual men like the female form. All gay men like the male form. All heterosexual women like the male form, and so on. Sexuality and attraction to sexuality is a fundamental part of being a human being, except for people who don't have a high sex drive. I forget the name for that, but there are some people who just don't have a high sex drive, and that's fine. I respect that. I'm not criticising them. All I'm saying is that I think there's a lot of hypocrisy in this moral taboo, and perhaps I shouldn't just focus on feminists. There's other groups as well who take issue with it, like religious groups. Again, I would defy any religious person to defy their own humanity and honestly say that they never have sexual desires. I mean, Jimmy Carter, and this is maybe going off topic. Now, in many respects I respect the man, but there's a famous event when he was running for president. He'd done an interview with Playboy magazine, and he admitted that he sometimes had lust for women, and that dogged him for a long time afterwards. I'm not saying that Jimmy Carter's a hypocrite, but you know, I know he's a deeply religious man, so to me that's a big problem with the religion, that it shackles human instinct. Now, personally I'm not interested in porn, and I don't actually like the explicit sex industry. I'm not personally interested in it. It doesn't often for me. Personally I prefer more subtle approaches. But what I have a problem with is that the feminist lobby and religious groups are denying basic human instincts. And let's be clear here, I'm not talking about rape culture. I'm not talking about anything that is against free will. I'm talking about free will, I'm talking about adult responsibility, and I'm talking about honest human desires. And I'm sorry if I know I've made similar videos to this, maybe it sounds like I'm repeating myself, but I do think this is important because it is perhaps the number one agenda of third wave feminism right now, is this obsession with objectification. It does exist, and clearly there are certain circumstances. For example, if a woman is clearly being viewed only for her sexuality, that's not a good thing. But if heterosexual men admire female sexuality, and the woman involved is entirely involved through her own free will, then who can dictate that all the adults involved shouldn't be involved in that situation unless they're breaking the law? And I would argue the same for a young man who chooses to be a Chippendale. It's his free will. And you know, I'm not saying that the industry is perfect, far from it, but what industry is? So I just think there needs to be more honesty in this debate about basic human desire. You know, if we're talking about people trafficking, sex slaves and that sort of thing, that's another issue, and that is a very, very important issue. I think it's an abomination that we live in a world where there is modern day slavery like that, and I think it's entirely legitimate to raise tough questions over those sort of issues. But what I'm concerned about is this is going to go to moral extremes whereby all sorts of sexuality is then moralised and we ban all of it. You know, where do you draw a red line with this? And I honestly believe that certain lobbies will not draw a red line. If they had their way, it would be illegal for men to be attracted to women. If that sounds like a dramatic statement, just look at how obsessed they are over this issue. They're going to get to the point where if a man even talks about female beauty, never mind sexuality, if he even mentions female beauty, feminists are going to turn around and attack him for objectifying her. I believe that's what we're going to get to. But honestly speaking, 99% of women would appreciate that sort of compliment. And that's very different than if you have a drunk on a train trying to touch a woman's breast. That's different, that's harassment. I'm talking here about honest human attraction, and that's all it is. So please do let me know your thoughts on this. Again, I welcome all feedback, and I'm very grateful to my subscribers, but any women watching, please do leave a comment. You know, I respect your opinion, I want to hear it, unless it's slandering me unfairly. But, you know, I'm open-minded and I'll take different views on this. So please do leave comments. Thank you.